Okay, so we have with us today Fernando from Argentina, except this time he is not in Argentina. He and his family have moved to Northern Ireland, so we got a lot to catch up on. And welcome, Fernando.
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me again in your channel. And yes, it's true. We've moved away from Argentina. We're no longer living there, and we've decided to move to Northern Ireland, and that's where we're living now.
So I understand that you and your family were kind of in the process of this for a while, discussing it. How did you end up picking Northern Ireland?
Well, for many years we've made up our minds about leaving Argentina many years ago, especially after a crisis. So we're talking about almost 10 years that we've been trying and wanting to leave, and always there was one reason or another. We've always tried to go to U.S. because that's where we want to be. That's where that would have been our first choice. But the immigration laws are very difficult in USA, in spite of what the amount of illegal immigrants may lead some to believe. It's very hard to move to USA legally. So understanding that wasn't much of a possibility for us anymore, but still wanting to leave Argentina, we started looking to other countries. We basically eliminated any third world country in South America, Central America, or Asian countries that were still third world countries, because we've had our fair share of experience with third world country living, and we didn't want to do that anymore. We basically focused on first world countries, given that we already had the European citizenship that helped narrow down things a bit. And so we basically focused on Spanish and English speaking countries in Europe. Since Spain is going through very hard times itself, we basically got rid of that option, and that was leaving us with UK. Now within UK there's England, there's Wales, there's Scotland, and there's Northern Ireland. There's also Republic of Ireland, but it's one of the countries that has been hit the most by the crisis. So Northern Ireland is still within the UK. It's also one of the safest places in UK, where prices aren't as high as in the rest of the United Kingdom. We like the kind of education kids we're gonna be getting here. It's also it's the only place in the United Kingdom where you can still do pistol action shooting, so it's legal to own them. So basically, because of all those reasons, we liked Northern Ireland a lot.
I think you mentioned too that you're coming from a Spanish speaking country, or is it by virtue of the geography, or you were saying that you are able to keep your citizenship, or that you have citizenship?
Yes, because my father, he's a Spaniard. He was born in Spain, and because of that, we have Spanish citizenship. So basically, that gives you the European Union citizenship, and you can legally reside as just any other citizen in any European Union country.
So no visa requirements or any hassles?
Nothing at all, no.
That's
no,
awesome.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, you mentioned...
Yes, yeah, before... sorry for cutting you out like that. Some people always mention that they have a relative or something that they could maybe go for the European citizenship. I think that's one of the smartest, best things you can do, to have dual citizenship, if possible at all. It's something that people should do if they have that option.
Yeah, now you mentioned the U.S., and there's a lot of... I don't know how many, so I won't say a lot, but I've heard that there's people, some of the ultra-rich, are moving away from the U.S., not just because of taxation, but because of a lot of reasons. I personally, being part of the prepper community and having kind of a prepper mindset, I've heard this before, but I've never really entertained it for myself, because to me there's enough places to move around within the U.S. that if things got bad in one area, you should be able to move around. But
Correct.
You're still under the umbrella of a more overreaching federal government, and that's probably not going to change. You obviously thought that the U.S. was worthy of coming to with all of your experience and knowledge in these areas. What are your thoughts about that? I mean, the USA is still a good place to live, and what about the viability going into the future?
I think it's gonna still be a great place to be in. And I think it's going to be still the best place to be in 10, 20 years from now. I think that what once made and still makes USA the greatest country there is, without a doubt, for people that love freedom, it is the best country to be in. And one of the common misconceptions is that people think that outside USA, all other countries are this big mess where they have no control whatsoever over their citizens. And that's really not the case, especially for people going to South America, thinking that South American governments are, are lazy, so they're not gonna be controlling you. There's no big brother. That's completely mistaken and shows a clear lack of knowledge of what it is in places like that. In South America, in Argentina, I can tell you myself, because I've lived there for 30 years, you have your national ID, you have your national credential, you're a number, you have basically none of the rights that people take for granted in USA. There's no Second Amendment. The Bill of Rights, the Constitution in South American and third world countries in general, the Constitution gets changed as if it were the script from a movie in process.
Kind of like Al Gore's living, breathing document, right?
Yeah, it's amazing how the Constitution in these countries has no weight whatsoever. So if you think that USA is too much big brother for you, then by all means don't go even to Europe, don't go to third world countries, because it's worse in those places. If that's what you're worried about, find a state that you somewhat like within the US and stick to that, because it is still the country that enjoys the most freedom.
I've heard too that for the average person, moving obviously is going to be prohibitive anyway, but your rights in some places in the US as well are contingent on how much money you make. So if you're just an average citizen, you're still going to be a number wherever you go.
Yes. Many countries demand a significant amount of money as well, so as to take you as a citizen. And there's been lots of people that keep saying the same thing. In Argentina, they welcome you for investment. After they take a few $100,000 away from you, they start making more and more problems until you give up on that business or that property you have and end up having to sell for much cheaper. Corruption in third world countries is not less than anything you will find in USA. It's actually going to be surprising lots of people from first world countries that are used to so different.
You mentioned when I was talking to you the other day about religious freedom in Northern Ireland. Can you tell us a little bit about that with the school system and just kind of the general atmosphere?
Again, one of the things that before coming here we did lots of research, and one of the things that I liked was that in spite of the dark history Northern Ireland has with the troubles and such, you're basically talking about Catholics and Protestants, and basically both of them are Christian, and the struggle was mostly in the grammar schools and the Catholic schools. But in either case, you have Christianity being taught in schools, and you have Catholicism being taught in the Catholic schools, and you have Christianity as well being taught in the public schools, in the grammar schools. So I'm talking about public schools with a very good level or excellent level of education that also includes Christianity teaching in those schools. My kid, he goes to a public school here, and I was pleasantly surprised one day when he told me that the last hour of his day he was taught gospel by the school itself. I think it's great.
Yeah, that's refreshing to hear, and there are places in the U.S. that you can still expect that, and obviously this is a far cry from oppression, but it's creeping in. There's a lot of attempts by people to kind of sterilize the whole debate or discourse on religion. But what about the just everyday life in Northern Ireland?
Again, going back to, for example, when we had a Christmas recently, the school itself organized, along with the local church, the Christmas carol that's going to be going, the kids going singing to the malls and such. And one of the things that makes me want to puke, honestly, is when I see, instead of Christmas, the Xmas, like the X, so as to suppress the Christ from Christmas or Happy Holidays. I think that's very sad. I think it's, I mean, if you're not a Christian and that you find that offensive in some way, I don't know, maybe there's places more suited for you, but it's actually a pity where in places where people do have that cultural thing going on to be lost because of politically correctness. And everyday life here is surprisingly pleasant and safe, and you notice that people just aren't scared. Of course, there's an economic problem that affects the entire planet, and the UK and Northern Ireland are no strangers, so that's something that is going on. But for us, coming from Argentina, with the amount of violence and crime we were living in on daily basis, now finding ourselves in such a safe place, people being very polite, very, you don't see people yelling or raising the tone of their voices. Everyone is very polite. That's something that I just love about it.
Yeah, that's a lot. A lot to be said for your quality of life, and preparing for scenarios is all well and good, but it has to affect your everyday life in a positive way. And moving
Ed, I don't get it when people say, okay, I'm gonna be going to live in the middle of nowhere in Alaska because I'm preparing for the end of the world. I don't know. You have to be realistic. I mean, life, you only have one. You have to live it in its fullest. And if you're gonna be doing that to your own life in preparation for something that is honestly kind of unlikely, I prefer to be prepared for eventualities that are more realistically possible, but also understand that there's a great chance that some of the worst events that you can prepare for aren't that likely to happen. So all those things considered, and even if those worst case scenarios occur, lots of people in the survival and preparedness community prepare basing themselves on fantasy, and if half of that they are expecting actually occurs, they would find themselves in a much worse situation than if they had been preparing more reasonably.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think like anything else, it can become an obsession, and a lot of times the obsession is an escape from reality and not grounded in reality, and I think that's why you see that. And you've mentioned that before, that much of this that you see on the board, on the survival blogs and the boards, message boards, and more and more, it's just a lot of it is fantasy, and I think it is people just imagining.
There's ton of examples. There's ton of examples. You talk about firearms and you say that you practice with a pistol, and a guy jumps up and says, "Yeah, but with my rifle I can shoot you 300 yards away." And okay, but that doesn't make any sense from a realistic defensive situation. You're not going to be shooting people 300 yards away. But when the zombies, when the looters come from the cities, like the locusts spreading and eating everything in the country, we're going to be shooting them when they come, the looters and the hordes. I mean, you're so far off that you don't quite get it. Or people criticizing the vehicle you choose because it's not EMP proof. Okay, maybe it's not EMP proof, but I'm not spending, it doesn't give me a 10 mile per gallon mileage, and I'm not driving myself into financial ruin for a vehicle prepared for an event that is very, very unlikely to happen.
Yeah, that's
that kind of obsession is what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And finances usually will, tone down the pretty much a lot of behaviors in life. If you don't have the finances to do it, you can't get too crazy. I mean, look at what unlimited finances and unlimited money can ruin a person. I mean, you just have to look at our movie stars to see that. But yeah, I mean, prepper community as well. If you've got tons of money, you can build a bunker. You can do a lot of crazy things. But like you say, what are the most likely things to occur, and why don't we prepare for those? If you got the money to go beyond that, great. But yeah, you can get pretty far afield on this stuff.
there's lots of that. There's lots of people preparing for scenarios that they come up in their own minds, and they're not even realistic. Even I'm talking about even worst case scenarios. People thinking that they're going to be fighting off hordes of hungry people. Please go back and look at history and see what happens in places where there's famine, where there's genocide, where there's religious or ethnical persecution, and people find themselves surrounded and outnumbered. What happens to those? Those guys eventually have to leave. Okay, and if you look at the Jews in Germany during the Nazi regime, how did those guys survive? Which ones survived? Did the ones that survived, did it by leaving before it got too bad, or did they survive by bunkering in and shooting it out with millions of Nazis around them? If you look at the genocides that occurred during the Bosnian Wars as well, there's so many real-world examples of worst-case scenarios that show you that the fantasy of mowing down looters and hordes of people from the cities is not even realistic.
Yeah, I agree with that entirely. I'm kind of laughing here to myself because we experience a lot of that on our YouTube channel. You know, people, for the most part, we get really good comments from people, and we always welcome differing opinions. But every now and then you get someone who's just incensed or just, you know, over the top, and you could tell they've got a screw loose, you know, and they give the prepper community a bad name.
Yes, and it happens. Now, I suppose it's the same thing in every other field, that there's people that are more realistic, people that are a bit more detached, but you know, it's just the way it is.
Yeah, you know, the other thing that comes to mind here is they have this new program on Nat Geo, National Geographic Channel, Doomsday Preppers, and we spoke probably 6 months or more ago, and I asked you your opinion because TLC had contacted us about our YouTube channel, my brother and I, and wanted to know if we were interested in being on their documentary, and we kind of explored the possibility. But after talking to you and looking at some of the other evidence out there, that these producers, they don't really want to tell a true story, they want to sensationalize, and I think that's apparent in this Doomsday Preppers. There's some good content on there, like Southern Prepper 1 has got a pretty good episode there. But you know, if you have plenty of preps to make it interesting, then they don't have to search further. But if you're just a basic prepper, they're gonna dig until they find something crazy to portray. You had a similar experience. They called you at one point.
Yeah, I had experience with a few producers. In one case, one of the first ones that contacted me several years ago. This was just when I was about to publish my book, so it's like, I don't know, like 3 years ago. This producer wanted me to sign a contract where basically I was resigning every rights to any material I would create that it could in some way be considered relative to the episode of talking about survival and preparedness. So you know, basically I was giving up any copyrights over any material I already had or would create in the future. My wife, she's a lawyer, and she saw that, and she just laughed and told me, "You'd be a complete idiot if you signed this. It's mind-numbingly stupid to sign something like this." I talked with the producers, and they told me, "Well, this is pretty standard, but we don't actually use this against people." I said, "Okay, but I'm not going to be signing this. It makes no sense whatsoever." What I recommend people doing is take into account the benefits that they're going to be getting and the disadvantages of showing up in these programs. Many times, I mean, first of all, you have to remember that it's TV, so it has to sell. And usually the easiest way to sell, especially these days with all the reality TV going on, is to do something that's sensational, that shows someone making a fool out of himself, or someone that looks like a nut job. And especially with the survival and preparedness community, they do have us labeled, unfortunately, as nut jobs. So when they start talking about showing guns and such, you have to be suspicious. The Nat Geo people sent me an email as well, asking if they came to my house, what it is that they would see and what would surprise them. What would be surprising them the most. I told them that what would surprise them the most was how well decorated, tasteful, and normal my house looked, and how there was nothing weird about it. That's definitely put a final nail in the coffin of our relationship. Will you be showing guns? Yes, I have guns, but I'm not going to be showing because there's nothing else to show. You can see guns in a gun store, and the gun that I keep handy, or a couple of guns that I keep handy, I'm not going to be showing them on TV like an idiot. They want to show someone making a bit of a fool out of himself, knowing or unknowingly so. And even if you try to be careful, as we talked before, they can edit it so that you do sound like a fool. So I always tell people to be very, very careful before getting involved in all this sort of thing.
Yeah, I remember Survival Mom had mentioned that as well, that she made the statement, something to the effect that, and this was on camera, something to the effect that her family, it wasn't like her family spent their entire waking moments preparing for the end of the universe, and when it made it to television, they chopped off the first part of that, and what you saw was, I'm quoting her now, we spend all of our time preparing for the end of the universe. So they basically chopped off the front of her statement and turned her statement into a totally different statement, which is totally deceptive.
And she ends up looking in poor light on national television, and she sent me an email when she was considering showing up in this or some other, when she was considering going public. I told her to be very careful about this sort of stuff. In the email I told her that if she was doing well with her website, so I understood that the press helps. But I told her to be very careful about this sort of stuff, because this is exactly what they do. They end up making you look like a fool, and you're basically ruining your own reputation. And why risk that? You know, if you're going to be risking that, at least do it for something, not for 5 minutes of fame.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the people, you know, when they approached us, they acted as though they wanted to get the word out. You know, the producers acted as though, you know, they had some good aim in mind, you know, and I saw right through that right away, that, you know, they're just going to say whatever they want, they think you want to hear, but they made it sound like, oh, well, you got a great message and we'd love to have people hear it, and, you know, on, and it's a bunch of baloney. They just want the bottom line. Yeah, I saw the episode with her. It wasn't too bad, but if you didn't know, you know, what she really said, you'd think that that was her statement. As it turns out, she looked okay, but, you know, same with Southern Prepper again. He had enough stuff to show them that they really didn't have to dig. But I think it was her mentioned they sent out several producers, and the first producers they sent out, they were there following him around, constantly asking him, where's the, you know, with paraphrasing, where's the crazy stuff, or where's the over-the-top stuff.
Oh, that's awful. That's awful.
And what happened was, they never had anything over the top to show them. They finally sent out a different set of producers, and she didn't say this, but it was clear in my head that the first bunch failed in their task to get the sensational, so they sent out a new crew. And
they send up a smarter team that somehow manages to get what they want from you.
Right.
I'm not saying to close entirely the door to media, because, you know, I told you before, I know a guy that's he's a TV producer, a director, and a Dutch TV producer. He does documentaries for Dutch TV. And this guy, he was in Argentina in 2001 doing a documentary when the crisis took place. Then he went back a few years later. Then he contacted me. We have a good relationship and such. I helped him out with some stuff. He wanted to show the reality of the real Argentina, how it is in the suburbs, how it is where real people are and not just the rich and famous. I hooked him up with some cops that I know in the place. Some guys are worth it, but others are not. So be very careful. If you can, ask for previous episodes so as to have an idea of the kind of thing they do. And if you even suspect the slightest suspicion of this all being just to make you look like a fool, like a nutcase, like running around with your guns and doing, I mean, that's all nice and good. Reserve it for the firearms training classes. Don't do it on TV where they're most likely going to be using it to portray you like a nutcase.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, you know, even on the YouTube channel, you know, it's in the back of my head. Sometimes I don't think of it, but I usually will think of it every so often, so I don't get too far afield. But, I mean, it's always in your mind that this stuff is part of the permanent record, so to speak. It's out there, and I think it belongs...
20 years from now, that YouTube video you made is going to be coming back and biting you, so be careful of what you put out there.
It is, and, you know, we try to have fun with it. The biggest thing that I think that differentiates YouTube from these programs on television is the dialogue. And, you know, when I first started in YouTube, I kept hearing about this community, you know, and I thought it's just more of this marketing lingo and it's nonsense. But after a while, I realized there is a type of community in that you start to subscribe to like-minded individuals, and there is a dialogue. People can comment on your videos, and so it truly is a two-way communication, whereas these things on television, they get it in the can, and that's it.
And besides, you have full control of what you put or don't put out there. It's not being edited for you. That's the key part of all this.
Yeah, it's a good point. A lot of times I'll take interviews or things that I do, and I'll edit out sound blips or other things, but I get a little leery when it's going to change the content too much, and of course knowing that you can portray things totally in a different light by editing. But yeah, I guess that's just the nature of the beast.
Yeah, I haven't seen. I just got started. Well, not just got started, but I've been doing YouTube videos, but still haven't got enough time to watch lots of other channels. So it's I know Southern Prepper one. I saw a couple of his videos. I saw a couple from this other guy that's having problems. The more heavy set guy that's having problems, that they took his guns away because of some psychiatric evaluation.
Yeah, from what I gathered, David Sarti went into the doctor. He had some problems breathing. The doctor came back and did a bunch of tests, said that he was fine. You know, I guess he figured it was psychosomatic, told the guy he should go talk to a psychologist, recommended him to go see a psychologist. At some point, the doctor must have thought he was suicidal, because he basically instructed him to go see this psychologist. It wasn't just a suggestion. And Sarti said no. He went home. They sent the sheriff to his home and forcibly took him in and committed him. I guess you had saw some of this on a blog where DeSarti supposedly said something about suicide in the form of putting a white sheet over his head. Or
well, in one of the videos, he says it himself. He says it in one of his videos that when asked if he was suicidal or not, he explained that he was Christian, so he couldn't actually kill himself, but that he supposed that then he would have to put a white cloth over his head and go to a minority neighborhood so as to get himself shot. I mean, it's basically, you're still saying you're going to be killing yourself one way or another, so I don't know.
Yeah, I guess it's unfortunate, but it's just like if you're in line at the airport and you joke about having a bomb, they don't really find the humor in it.
Exactly. I've had a friend that's been through serious depression himself, and you don't joke with this sort of stuff. People do kill themselves, and if you're talking about pulling that off of putting a white hood over your head and getting getting shot in a minority hood. It's not that far away from threatening the police with a water gun and get the police to shoot you down or do something else very stupid. It's you're talking about doing things that are dangerous, that are I mean, you cannot expect any good to come from that sort of thing.
Yeah, I feel bad for the guy. I mean, you know, his guns are gone now. He can't deal with kids, and I guess that was a part of his deal. But I don't know the full story. I do know that supposedly someone from the NRA was trying to help him out, and they all of a sudden...
Yeah, but I actually saw one of the videos. The guy from the NRA, at least this is what I've seen in his videos, I think it was this morning, and the guy from the lawyer of the NRA did not want to take his case for some reason. I think that there's a bit more to all this than we actually see, and
yeah, that could
I don't know.
That very well could be. Well, yeah, it's too bad. But then again, you know, the other thing is there's always another possibility, and I don't mean inversions, but I mean in, you know, the outlook in the future. Who knows if this doesn't turn out to be a good thing for him in some way, because, you know, we do all this preparation and sometimes we focus on that to the exclusion of everything else. You mentioned a very interesting thing the other day, that there's statistically many people that are victims of crimes, whether they have a gun or not, may end up suffering a heart attack because of their physical limitations.
Yes, it happens a lot. It happens so much. It's surprising, and I'm surprised that people haven't heard about this more often. But we did in Argentina during the robberies. One of the most common things that happened was, especially with older folks or people with cardiac problems, like our friend here, that it's you know, in a physical condition that it's not very positive. When people found themselves in those extreme tension moments during robberies, they would suffer heart attacks. Many would die of heart attacks during the robberies. And when I was in Barcelona recently, before coming here to Northern Ireland, the taxi driver that took me to the airport, he was also a heavy-set, fat guy that he had been robbed, carjacked himself. Seems that a bad guy he took as a passenger, he stabbed him in the neck a couple times, just a couple pokes, so as to intimidate him and scare him. When he stabbed a little bit in his neck, drawing a little bit of blood, he suffered a heart attack as well. So, you know, it's important to be in proper physical condition because of all these things. Not only because it's just good old common sense for daily life as well, but if you're thinking of being prepared for some extreme situations, you have to be in good physical shape as well. Work out, go for a walk, be in the best possible physical shape your condition and your situation can afford.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is important to remember too is the fact that you may have a concealed carry permit, or you might be a black belt in some form of martial arts. Usually when you talk to people that are armed to the teeth, whether through their skill or through an actual weapon that they might carry on their person, those people are the ones that are trying to avoid conflict, because the last thing you want to do is hurt somebody. Obviously, if it's someone deserving of it or not. You brought up an interesting point about the financial matter, the legal matters.
Yes, that's something that people talk a lot about getting into gunfights and shooting down every bad guy they come across. Now, it's obvious that they haven't done that very often, because if not, they would know how expensive it is to actually shoot someone and have to face the legal implications of it. It's thousands and thousands of dollars, even if you are on the right side of the law, which sometimes it gets a bit blurry. So just pray that the situation is extremely clear, that the guy you shot down has a police file, as like a phone book, because if it's even the slightest bit of a confusion in how things went down, it's going to be very expensive, and you may even risk going to jail if it's not very clear. Even in the best possible case, you're still talking about thousands and thousands of dollars of legal defense.
Yeah, you mentioned that you had I don't know how the story went exactly. Maybe you could refresh my memory, but giving the money rather than you'd save money if you just handed the guy $10 if he's robbing you.
Yeah, if you just lose the contents of your wallet, if you just, I know it's a bit of a problem getting your driver's license and your credit cards and all that again, but if you just lose maybe $100-$200, it's nowhere near the amount you would be spending on legal defense if you shoot that guy. So even if we get rid of the moral dilemma of shooting a bad guy or not, just because of the financial implication, is something that you should keep in mind as well. And James Yeager, the owner of Tactical Response, he's very proficient with the firearm, he still did a very good video explaining just this, that the amount of money it costs you shooting someone is nothing in comparison to what you carry in your pocket. If it's just a matter of losing your car or losing a few bucks, go for that. Now, of course, if it's a situation where you're talking about having to give up your life or the life of your family, we're talking about different situations. But if it's a clear mug or a robbery, or if you see that the situation can be solved, just quickly handing over your wallet and getting it over, you have to be mature enough to overcome the macho thing, the egos that sometimes flourish in the defensive community. You have to be cold-headed about these sort of things.
Yeah, I think you're right, absolutely. And another thing comes to mind. I remember when I was working in a nightclub doing security. At one club I was just a single, one-man operation there. I've worked at places where you got other guys helping you, but this one place was pretty casual, and I was just working the door, And one day the waitress came up in kind of a panic because somebody back there got into it, and I went back to the dance floor where this had occurred, and there was this big guy standing there, and he was bloody from his head. Couldn't tell what was going on at first, and then over in another corner was this little guy, and he was, looking fearful. It looked like the opposite of what the scenario should have been. The big guy was standing there all bloody. There was a little guy over in the corner. After I separated him and got the big guy out front, asked him if he wanted an ambulance and so forth, come to find out, he didn't do anything to the little guy, but the little guy was so afraid. There was some words exchanged, but there was nothing physical from the big guy. That the little guy picked up a bottle and he hit him over the head with it, and he totally overreacted is what happened. And now here's a situation, because the one guy had this fear of being hurt, that really he owned that. That's on him. He was fearful, and then he overreacted, and it turned out where the guy didn't want an ambulance, and him and his friends took him home, and everything was fine. But if that was another situation, he would have legal fees to contend with. If a gun was involved, he might have overreacted and killed someone over something.
End up in jail.
Right, and you hear so many people talking about how they're going to handle property crimes with violence.
Yeah.
Hell, if somebody's stealing your car...
Another common thing, the idea that there's a time of rule of law and there's this other time of without rule of law, where you basically get away with anything. I'm still surprised that people think that way, that there's going to be a time when they're going to be getting away with everything. You cannot think that way. It's dangerous to even think that way, and I hope that people just talk about it and not actually think of doing it. If there's an event, a natural or man-made disaster of any kind, and there's moments when the police cannot respond, it doesn't mean that you're not going to be legally implicated and legally responsible for your actions. Even if you go back to the Bosnian Wars, the Bosnian War during the siege of Sarajevo, where it was basically ethnic cleansing of people, mass rape, mass murder, people getting shot and thrown over a bridge. Even those guys, years later, were chased all over the world for their actions. So don't ever think that you're going to be getting away with anything, because most likely, rather than not, you're going to be paying for whatever that is that you did. So just do your best to stay on the right side of the law at all times, as you should.
Yeah, yeah. I read that book, Sarajevo Survival. I forget.
Yeah, the Sarajevo Survival Manual. Yeah, it's very good. I recommended it.
Yeah, very good book, and interesting too. Not your typical survival book, but boy, reality and in context too. I think the problem too. You had spoke about children that are starving or families that have no food, that come to say, you have a farm and they come to the farm to take food. Well, you're not going to shoot those people for stealing your crops, even though you want to preserve your crops. You're not going to shoot them.
It's extremely gray. It's a gray zone, because I've had a friend that he owns a big farm, and he had this problem on daily basis. People trespassing just to steal maybe a few crops. Mostly, when I was at his place, I saw that they were stealing firewood. Well, are you going to be shooting a 10-year-old because he's running away with a couple branches from your property? I mean, unless you're a complete lunatic, you're not. So you have to be sensitive. You cannot come up with these easy. You don't fix everything with a bullet.
I think the problem for a lot of people in I'm not going to say the new generation, because I've seen it in every generation, but
yes, it's been for guys that have been in this for decades and still think this. You know what I think it is? That they don't have any real experience on all this, on one hand, and on the other hand, they haven't even researched well what actually happens when these events go down for real in other places throughout history. Yeah, so they're just sticking to a fantasy that they have in their own heads, or they read in a novel, or they saw in a movie, and they base their entire preparedness in just fantasy instead of focusing on learning from history.
Yeah, it kind of tells you what's in their heart more than it does what the reality is going to be.
Yeah.
Hey, one of the things too I wanted to ask you about is, you mentioned that you're able to have your guns there in Northern Ireland, but we have a lot of people from UK, other parts of UK, that maybe they can't have certain guns. You said that you can probably have some weapons but not others. What is the general sense of the preppers in UK on what types of weapons you can have?
Well, legally you can. Here in Northern Ireland you can own handguns, which is the only place in UK where you can legally do so. But in the rest of UK you can also own shotguns. And I mean, if you have a double-barrel shotgun, you're not exactly unarmed. So sometimes it's more about people thinking that you cannot do stuff when you can actually do, and they don't even bother researching thoroughly what it is allowed within their legislation. In many places around Europe, I think that in every European country you can have one firearm or another, and when you confront them and tell them, okay, look, the truth is that you can actually own this and this, and they come and they tell you, well, but you have to join a club and then spend a couple months or a couple years or whatever. Okay, so we're talking about, first, we went from being illegal, that you thought was just impossible to do so, to being complicated. And complicated is not impossible, it's just harder. So that's not enough of an excuse. If you have to jump through a few loops to get your firearm, just do so. Do take advantage of the laws you have.
Yeah, I think people need to educate themselves is the bottom line. And there's so much information out there. And there's bad information out there too, but there's enough good information that if you really want to, you can find the truth. I think a lot of it has to do with people's intentions. They want to wrap up their own emotional issues into, a label, and unfortunately, the prepper label has got a lot of baggage. So on a lighter note, how are the pubs there in Northern Ireland?
Yeah, pubs are great, as you can come to expect in Northern Ireland. Guinness beer is very popular as well.
So do they
People
have?
do like drinking. You know what? One curious thing that I noticed, they don't even sell rubbing alcohol in the stores, because they apparently had a problem with kids drinking that up. It was pretty surprising. They have this methyl spirits, which they add some other products so as to make it unpalatable for drinking, even provoking vomiting, because they would drink that up. Mostly a matter of protecting the alcoholic beverage, which are heavily taxed, so as to not avoid that taxation. But I thought it's curious. I had a problem finding alcohol for my Trangia stove for going camping and such.
Yeah, that is interesting. You'd think the stereotypical Ireland would be just drowning in alcohol. Well, there again, yeah. Stereotypes.
Everclear, like corn alcohol, grain alcohol. It's not illegal, I think, as well. I think it's because of the amount of alcohol content. It's not legal in UK. So you only will find that in US.
So how about mate? Am I pronouncing it right? Mate.
Mate.
What is the stuff they had in Argentina? Mate or mat or?
Mate. Ah, okay. Yeah, mate. You know, I haven't seen any places. The thing is that Northern Ireland is very. It's not a place where there's a mixture of cultures, which, for example, if I want to go find an Argentine store that sells mate, I'm not going to be finding that in Northern Ireland. If I go to London or in Spain, in Barcelona, there are stores that sell that kind of stuff. But it's also good because with the lack of mixture of different cultures, sometimes you avoid problems and some amount of crime that usually comes up in that mixture as well, of people of different cultural backgrounds clashing one with another. So even though it has its disadvantages, it has its advantages as well.
Yeah, so I totally butchered the pronunciation of mate.
Oh, mate. Yeah.
Well,
but I'm a firm believer of wherever it is you are, you have to adapt and be part of that community. Not try to keep doing your thing. I'm not going to be, raising an Argentine flag here and start butchering cows and doing asados in my front lawn. I'll try to incorporate the local culture and be part of that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm kind of, I guess you could say WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant upbringing,
Yeah.
blue collar, southwest side of Chicago, which has its own stereotype. And so there wasn't much ethnicity in my daily life. And later I married a girl who's from Ukraine. Well, her family was originally from Ukraine. And the father was a Ukrainian Baptist preacher, and so he was usually the person that people would go to in America, at least in the Chicago area, to kind of get help in, what to do next once you arrive in America. And from what I understand, his big thing was you need to assimilate. This is the way we do things in America. And yeah. I thought that was interesting because I always assumed from my own prejudices that, this was a Ukrainian community and they had their own customs and,
And they would keep their traditions. I mean, it's fine to keep your traditions, but you cannot confront the place you're in with your own traditions and expect everyone else to accept that. It's not because they're racist or anything or they have any prejudice. You cannot expect the rest of the world to adapt to you. You are the one that has to adapt to the majority around you.
Yeah, that's good advice. I think that's pretty much across the board. Well, I really appreciate you being on with us today. Can you tell us a little bit more about your book and where we can find your book?
Yeah, my book is called The Modern Survival Manual, Surviving the Economic Collapse. It's, as the title says, it's a modern survival manual for mostly urban survival type of stuff and the kind of stuff we've been talking about here. It's available on Amazon. Just search for the title and you'll find it rather easily.
Yeah, I've read the book. It is filled with very good information that you're not going to see anywhere else, and so I really appreciate that. That's
Thanks.
Shaped a lot of my preparedness. It brings things down to earth. So anybody that's listening that wants a great resource, that would be top of the list for me. But thanks for being here, and we'll keep in touch.
Thanks, Sid, and by all means, I'd love to talk again some other time, so just give me a call and we'll arrange it.
Okay, thanks.